Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Kevin Stewart. I'm the president of the Austin Institute for the Study of Family and Culture, and we are proud to be co-sponsors of this event with the Salem Center here at the Macomb School of Business, our good friends here. This series is all about exploring and even challenging orthodoxy. So we bring people with views slightly off the conventional wisdom to challenge that conventional wisdom, and I think it's one of the things that makes academia at its best when it's there, and that is the willingness to entertain contrary views on things. We think that leads to thriving. Well, first of all, just good conversation, but second of all, a sort of thriving community. When it can be self-critical, when it can entertain alternative possibilities and have the confidence to do that. We aim often at the Austin Institute to inspire exactly that. So it made us particularly proud and excited to partner in this series with the Salem Center. Tonight, we have a speaker who will very much be in that vein, I trust, having known him for a while. James Pouluos creates and advises brands and ventures at the intersection of technology, media, and design. He is the co-founder and editor of The American Mind at the Claremont Institute and the founder and publisher of Return at New Founding. James is the author of 2 books, Human Forever and The Art of Being Free. His writing has appeared in the Claremont Review of Books, Le Figaro, National Affairs, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, among many other publications. He lives on the edge of Los Angeles. James.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you all for being here. Thank those of you who are inside the computer or inside the screen that's inside the computer. I'm delighted to be here in Texas. This is where the action is. So I'll try to add to the fire that is burning. So doing business in a post-apocalyptic world. We are here in the name of challenging orthodoxy, and so I'm going to begin with a quote from the Lord of counterintuitive thinking himself, Mr. Peter Thiel. In a recent conversation hosted by the Lincoln Network, Thiel observes that, quote, in the 17th or 18th century, the self-styled deists or rational thinkers were the anti-church people, and the church was considered excessively dogmatic. And now it's the opposite. It's Orthodox Christians who are the most heterodox independent thinkers left in this country, unquote. This may seem an odd place to begin thinking through the way that technology has changed how we do business and have to do business in America. Orthodox Christianity is gaining in popularity among some Americans, but is still barely pushing 1% adherence in the national population. Even if that jumps up to 10% over the next few years, we are still probably quite a ways off from discovering what a really American orthodoxy looks like. Just one example of how heterodox Orthodox theology seems to Americans is its expectation of God's bodily resurrection of the dead in the end times. It is a little funny to me that this idea is a scandal among people willing to blindly believe that human consciousness will eventually be slurped out of our bodies and poured into our machines. But actually, bodily resurrection is straight out of the Nicene Creed, and so really any Christian should or could be thinking this way. And from this standpoint, the real scandal is that so many don't, even though lots of Christians continue to fall into the very old pattern of actively hoping for the end times, for the apocalypse. Why they do this, if they don't believe in bodily resurrection, is an interesting question. And the answer appears in many cases to be because they don't believe in the bodily resurrection. Many Christians in America appear interested not just in being done with the bother of the sinful world, but to be rid of their human bodies altogether, beaming up into a kind of infinite spiritual commune that seems not so different from the uploaded consciousness of the so-called futurist imagination. This old pattern of trying to call down the divine liberation of the spirit from the confines of the accursed physical world is known as Gnosticism, from the Greek word for knowledge, as in secret knowledge. The secret knowledge about how you, ostensibly, can destroy the grip of the created world on the divinity inside you, waiting to be turned loose. You can find Gnostic heresies in every age and every denomination of Christianity. And in that regard, orthodoxy is no exception. Although even here, orthodoxy distinguishes itself today in the strength of its theological determination to reject the idea that we're really pure spirit beings, and that the afterlife of such beings is the real life which we must actively aspire to and work to usher in. This insistence arises fundamentally from a faith that Jesus was serious when he said only God the Father knew when the end times were to come. That it isn't ours to know or to say, because we humans are created to be humans before, during, and after the end times. This idea that we are human forever is really the most heterodox thing an American can say in the face of the smothering dogma asserted by our globalized technocratic elite. Their view is summed up by Bill Gates' favorite so-called futurist, the gay Jewish atheist Yuval Noah Harari, who is out there preaching the anti-gospel, that, quote, Jesus rising from the dead and being the Son of God is fake news, unquote. Even if Jesus couldn't rise from the dead, then you're definitely not going to yourself. Unless you want to be decayed bones or a pile of ash, you need Harari and his crew to be the priests of a new technological God, one powerful enough to end human time and human identity by copying and pasting your consciousness into the Borg. If, that is, you do as you're told. Now, the word apocalypse is another word with Greek origins, in this case meaning revelation in the sense of something major being revealed or disclosed. The Gnostic apocalypse is one where the revelation is a perfect way for who you really are to be liberated in a purified form from the irredeemable constraints of the given world. This is why the so-called trans movement has rocketed up to the top of everyone's consciousness. Trans means transhumanism, using technology to give spirit a weapon powerful enough to destroy the given forms of our human being. In an age where it is now possible to do such violence to one's own humanity, transforming oneself into a cyborg, the Gnostic Christian meaning of revelation, a rapture where those who wish for it well enough are rewarded by leveling up to pure spirit status, loses whatever distinctiveness it used to have. It also becomes much more dangerous. Digital technology has, in this sense, already ushered in an apocalypse. What it reveals is that automated tools we designed to do our bidding more perfectly than ever are now being intended to destroy our sinful human being and replace it with a sacred cyborg swarm. What it reveals is that this shocking transformation is a theological response to the incredible power of the swarm of digital entities we unleash on the world. Entities so powerful that now no human or group of humans can rule the world instead. Unable to beat them, you must join them, say the priests of the new swarm god, and by join, they mean worship in the all-consuming manner and mode they prescribe. And sure enough, hundreds of millions of Americans are already being conditioned to worship this swarm board. As Marshall McLuhan showed decades ago, digital technology is a medium, not a god, but media reshape and rework our inner and outer lives in such profoundly environmental ways that people ignorant of this process, which Aristotle called formal cause, easily or instinctively mistake it for divine agency. On the orthodox account, rather than being created with original sin, we humans become mortal by rejecting God's authority, that is, by worshiping other things instead of God. You don't have to be a theologian to recognize how worshipful of our technology we have become. Norbert Wiener, the founder of cybernetics, railed against the gadget worshippers, taking over in the 1960s before his death. And today our gadgets are more powerful, authoritative, and spiritual than ever before. Think about it. Most Americans by far experience digital technology today in its most disincarnate forms, interacting constantly with the invisible, innumerable, instantaneously interoperable information entities that fly at will through our buildings and our bodies and our minds. Some might even say through our souls. Until just a few years ago, these properties were, since the dawn of human spacetime, reserved for spiritual beings, namely angels and demons. For people programmed by modern and postmodern propaganda to believe religion was fake news, the sudden domination of the world and of their most intimate lives by the alien race of the cyber swarm was an apocalypse truly out of the blue, a godlike eruption beyond comprehension that demanded what it instinctively triggered: genuflection, protestation, the repeated pouring out All told then, what Americans need to recognize is that all the crisis mongering coming down from the techno priests about the human caused apocalypse to come, climate apocalypse, pandemic apocalypse, the population apocalypse, the consumption apocalypse, the apocalypse of race and class and sexual injustice, the real apocalypse that we need to worry about is the one that has already happened: the conquest of the entire world by the digital entities swarm. Yes, if the new priests of the cyborg theocracy have their way, life will get even worse, far worse than most Americans are willing and possibly able to imagine. But the way to stop that dystopian outcome is not by competing to dream up the most terrifying scenario. It is to understand what has already irreversibly happened and to take action from there that can preserve our American form of government, our American way of life, and our given human identity as incarnate and souled beings. If anything might be a nonpartisan agenda, you would think that this might be it. But for reasons I doubt I need to explain, most people today who are focused on saving American civilization and saving our human nature are focused on using political weapons and tools to do so. There certainly isn't anything wrong with that approach. If the American people become unable to practice politics in a way that ensures their government and regime preserve America and Americans' identity, the task of preserving our way of life and our human being becomes incredibly more difficult. But if politics is necessary, not sufficient, it is not sufficient. And that is because, at most, our regime can only make a shelter for us under which we can live faithfully, fruitfully, and felicitously. The task falls to us, not to our rulers, to actually do life in that way. Alexis de Tocqueville understood this as well as anyone. His counsel for our statesmen was to force us, however awkwardly, to deal with our problems politically, face to face, neighbor to neighbor, not on any ideological grounds, but because without that hard practice, our taste for freedom would lapse and our hearts would shrink back into isolated and disconnected self-enclosure, corrupting and ultimately destroying not just our form of government, but our human and spiritual vitality. Like Montesquieu, Hobbes, and other political theorists before him, Tocqueville understood political science as ultimately a question of the movement of human bodies in space over time. The knowledge proper to politics was the knowledge of movements salutary to human life and of the structures of law, habit, and mores that conduced to and protected that movement, which could never be abstracted into a single pattern, contemptuous of the particular conditions in a people's particular space-time, without sterilizing and so ending, eventually, human life itself. Quote, "To force all men to march with the same step toward the same purpose, that is a human idea," wrote Tocqueville. "To introduce an infinite variety in actions, but to combine them so that all these actions lead by 1,000 paths toward the accomplishment of a great design, that is a divine idea," unquote. Just so, but the cyborg swarm and its priests have introduced dangerous new complications. While we might see today's imposition of a social credit system, complete with a woke and queerist civic religion, as a stultifying forced march toward one destination, the priests of the cyber swarm insist that they are in fact the new masters of an infinity of choices and actions. They are merely the only ethical experts, they say, qualified to interact with the swarm at the highest spiritual and scientific level, studying it, learning from it, nudging and guiding and directing it toward our post-human purification in the manner they and their machines best determine. Let me suggest that what Tocqueville really means is that it's only our given human being itself through which infinite variety in actions has been introduced into the world, and that understanding this means understanding to whom our savingly fruitful variety is owed. Innovate as we might, innovating away our humanity can only spirit away the generativity of active life. The energy of the soul cannot be substituted by the energy of the machine. Because this point is fundamental to human existence, it is one that has not been lost on another more recent observer of American life, the truly heterodox Vladimir Putin. While Russia in many ways continues to illustrate Tocqueville's warning that the world faced an alternative between equality and freedom and equality and servitude, Putin's recent and repeated remarks about the catastrophe of communism reinforced Tocqueville's insight into the political irreplaceability of the natural social movement of ensouled human bodies. In his recent Valdai address, Putin warned that Russia's, quote, difficult and sometimes tragic history showed, quote, the cost of ill-conceived social experiments is sometimes beyond estimation. Such actions, he said, can destroy not only the material, but also the spiritual foundations of human existence, leaving behind moral wreckage where nothing can be built to replace it for a long time. Without suggesting that Russia had fully recovered from the communist catastrophe, Putin suggested instead that, quote, at least our society has developed what they now refer to as herd immunity to extremism that paves the way to upheavals and socioeconomic cataclysms. People really value stability, he went on, and being able to live normal lives and to prosper, while confident that the irresponsible aspirations of yet another group of revolutionaries will not upend their plans and aspirations, unquote. The catastrophe of communism's rise and rule led inexorably on his account to the catastrophe of its collapse. Quote, many have vivid memories of what happened 30 years ago, and all the pain it took to climb out of the ditch where our country and our society found themselves after the USSR fell apart, unquote. The point, of course, is not that America can look to Russia or to Putin for a model to get out of our own accelerating collapse, the evidence of which is all around us, not least in the psychological and cultural meltdown of people cowed and corrupted by the digital swarm and its priests. But Americans must look to Russia's catastrophic experience, swapping machinery for soul, in an attempt to perfectly orchestrate the collective movement of all. I am glad that it is not my burden to try to ensure that the Russian people can recover swiftly enough from the communist catastrophe to survive and perhaps even thrive in the wake of the digital apocalypse. That's because while I find Orthodox theology as authoritative as so many Russians do, my civilization is American, not Russian. And while America faces a special constitutional and cultural challenge in not being able to impose a theocratic solution to the devilish problem of how to resubmit the digital entities to human rule, America also has a special advantage in figuring out how to cope with this challenge. That advantage brings us to the heart of the matter of doing business in the wake of the digital apocalypse. Some of us here, doubtless, personally remember the astonishing spectacle of the Soviets seemingly dominating every field of human endeavor. If this is not fresh enough for you, sit down with Sylvester Stallone's peak Cold War film Rocky IV, where Dolph Lundgren's Soviet Superman, Ivan Drago, fatally knocks out Rocky's dear friend Apollo Creed, and Rocky flies to the USSR to avenge Creed's death in the ring. The soulless Soviet Borg looked poised to defeat America on screen and off in every one of our infinite avenues, most of all the physical, industrial, scientific, and military ones. This was, after all, the entity, Soviets, that beat us, at least at the start, in the so-called race for space. But the Soviet wager on mastering the movement of human bodies in space-time through the substitution of the technical for the soul was a failure. And the only institution of soul left standing was the much reduced Russian Orthodox Church. Now, the challenge for Putin and any Russian statesman is twofold. Not only is a vast labor required to reform the Russian people back into a soulful condition, so too must Russia figure out how to reanimate the Russian body into a condition of physical vitality sufficient to prevent its Christianity from succumbing to the Gnostic temptation, to view the given human form as a despicable curse, and to view the ushering in of the end times as the true form of worship. Contrast this then with the American predicament. Like Russia, we still enjoy a tremendous amount of space. Unlike Russia, we have enjoyed a remarkable length of geopolitical time, free from outside interference, attack, and destruction. Now, the time is short to salvage ourselves from the cyborg theocrats we have spawned. But our space does remain a great advantage, and still more, the culture we developed within that great space, sheltered by our particular form of government. Under digital conditions, what matters even more than the race for space is the space for race. And I don't mean white or black or that kind of race, but a lineage of people from which they really can't escape. We are stuck being American, biologically, culturally, spiritually. There is no time to try surviving the digital apocalypse by transforming into a new and different race of humans or post-humans. Elite efforts to transform us into constituent parts of a transhuman cyborg swarm can only do more and greater damage. This graft will not take. This means that in order to mitigate or avoid further damage, we must move our distinctively American given human bodies around in our particular slice of space-time in a way that is particularly healthy for us and protective of us. But let me also be clear with you that the damage I speak of is not just spiritual or cultural damage, but an incredible and probably immeasurable damage to business. Because the way to move us around in the right way to preserve us is, in America, commercial movement, which alone affords us the innumerable paths to fruitful vitality that can fill our vast space with the soulful energy needed to sustain our constitutionally guaranteed form of government. For all the high-level stuff we are discussing here and forcing ourselves to confront, Americans are an irascibly practical people, and the practical reality is that we are stuck as Americans having to pour our soul energy, our anima, as Aristotle would say, into not just worship or family or just personal development, crucial as those things are, but into commerce, into the cultural creation and activation of institutions and webs of shared enterprise and common markets. The need for us to be who we are in this sense, despite all the many agonies and sins dragging us down, is one we simply don't share with any other race of people or any civilization state, no matter how innate human trade and barter may be. This is, in an odd sense, the cross we must bear, a laborious middle path between mere consumerist gluttony or mere producerist frenzy, between the rapacious human use of the world as a mere resource and the rapacious cyborg use of humanity as its own mere resource. In sum, we need our business people to pour their soulful energies into reanimating the quintessentially American commercial spirit and commercial activity of the American people. And what is more, we need them to do so in a way that wrests control of our digital entities back, both from the automated protocols of the machines and from the priestly rituals of the cyborg theocrats. To me, at least, it's fairly clear what this means. I chose to show it more than to explain it by selling my book, Human Forever, in Bitcoin and publishing it on the Bitcoin blockchain. Bitcoin is one of the world's very most powerful digital technologies. But unlike social credit, or AI, or transhumanist interventions, it is a technology that Americans can, right now, use as consumers as well as producers. Right now, they can build fresh, yet quintessentially American institutions that create valuable, memorable, protective culture, and algorithmic markets that reward it on digital foundations, telling compute to do things that strengthen us, not weaken us. My book and the platform called Canonic that made its publication possible are just one example of these kinds of institutions. And ultimately, although the content is always important, it is the form that determines the content. And it is the use of symbol through which we show people, without having to explain to them, what forms into which they can fruitfully and savingly pour their energies of soul. Nothing I have said here can compare in counsel with what I have been so greatly blessed to do at New Founding with our new publication, Return. Speaking as the editor of the Claremont Institute's American Mind, bold and deep interventions into political contestation are essential to ensuring that an America that arises from the catastrophes of the digital revolution is still, in the good sense, recognizably American. Speaking as the publisher of Return, that political endeavor relies in fateful measure on our capacity to decisively reanimate the commercial enterprise of many millions of Americans by creating and driving new digital age brands. Brands similar to, although by no means limited to, Return. I am reliably told by my favorite online etymology site that brands go back to the signature livestock paint jobs of medieval animal husbandry. Of course, in Texas, the power and the authority of the cattle brand needs no explanation. But gone are the days of electric age branding, when made-up dreams and visions caused by military technology repurposed for amusement and pleasure to take on the mesmeric guise of a shortcut to nirvana. In the digital age, brands are spiritual wagers Americans must take on their own culture and their own mettle. Wagers made to remind our fellow neighbors and citizens of the vitality with which they must still joyfully and fruitfully meet their responsibilities. If the digital retrieves the medieval, in ways often alien or dispossessing to most Americans, the founding of brands in this sense reminds our people that here there is more to social order than the four estates: those who work, those who pray, those who fight, and those who write. The brands I have had the honor and I believe the duty to help create so far, foremost among them the American Mind and Return, deserve so much of my life, insofar as I and my teams labor to make them credible promises of distinctly American flourishing in dramatically new and dangerous conditions, through an entanglement of art, commerce, theology, and theory, which no explanation or ethic can deconstruct or vivisect. Here is a human vitality, immeasurable and unpredictable enough to outwit and outpace the digital swarm. Here, though time is short, is the space it is our responsibility to steward. Our word culture comes from the Latin colere, to tend, to guard, to respect, to practice. The colonist, the husbandman, the settler in the new land, is the true man of culture. Here is our wild frontier, our fruited plain, our dark forest, our high range of mountains, waiting, though time is short, for new pioneers, led now by our men of culture from home to new home and from founding to new founding. Thanks very much. I understand we have time for questions.
We do have time for questions. If it's okay, I'd like to exercise the prerogative of the chair as first.
That's your prerogative.
So I think there's a lot to chew on there, and I'm probably going to have to watch the video again, and eager to do so. And so I'm wondering, I started thinking right away as you're talking about digital conditions, and these aren't your words, they're mine, but I think it's close to what you mean, tend to swallow and then re-articulate institutions, arrangements, and various arts and culture in new ways. And I was thinking, most immediately, given our work, one experience most readily to mind is the way that online dating has changed meeting, mating, and marrying. But I wondered if you could walk through, for the benefit of everyone else, people who haven't maybe read your work or McLuhan's, kind of just give a good example of how digital conditions are doing. I think you're right in what you ascribe to them, but maybe pick your favorite example of how it's sort of chewing up and spitting back out reality at us.
Well, so one example is the Walt Disney Corporation. You go back to the beginning of Walt Disney. You get a new line of work called Imagineering, a word that is still used at the Disney Corporation. Engineers of the imagination. How do you do that? Well, you use television. You use the wonderful world of color, as they said. My dad tells the story of, it was black and white, and then Tinkerbell comes in and goes, pow, and color explodes, and pow, and more color, and then the whole screen fills with color. And the rapidity with which America went from black and white TV to color TV, it was transformational. And in this sense, all Americans are people of color, because the mind, soul, was connected so intimately with the communications media of television that became a sort of portal through which human beings in their inner and outer lives were reformed. And that's Imagineering. Now, at that time, America was so powerful, and televisual technology was so powerful, and we were so masterfully in command of that technology that the idea formed among the elite, but eventually among the people too, that whoever dreamed the biggest and best dreams and broadcast those dreams into the hearts and minds of the most people would rule the world, and in fact deserved to rule the world. This was the upshot of the Cold War. Americans are the most imaginative, the most expert, and the ethical of the Imagineers in the world, and that's how we will win. And to a degree, that is how we won. We also won as a result of massive military budgets and research and development, but those military budgets caused many technologies to be created that were turned into forms of entertainment. Everything from cable television to the touchscreen technology to GPS. This isn't just me sort of making things up. There's a whole book called The Entrepreneurial State by Maria Mazzucato that just runs through it. For her, she's like, this is great. The state is important. We need the state in order to have this great innovation. And it's like, well, but what do we make? We're like barbarians trying to eat dinner with like a mace in one hand and a club in the other. We're using these weapons of war to amuse ourselves to death. Very bizarre. And so you can already start to see how the medium of television formed us in a way that really foregrounded the human faculty of the imagination to a point where it became a sort of idol. And we looked to the human imagination as a kind of divine competency within us, upon which our salvation would rise or fall. Into this milieu appears the internet, another creation of the military intelligence complex. Hooked up to the research universities that they have the best relationships with, and designed to ensure that we would survive and be able to truly do business in a post-apocalyptic world, one where the nukes go off. Now, I think it's interesting that for all the close shaves that we had with the nukes, they never did go off. And the military pretty quickly figured out, after they had innovated as much as possible on that technology, that these were weapons that really couldn't be used often enough to justify their costs, their creation, their maintenance. Yes, there's mutually assured destruction, but a military wants to use its weapons, and those weapons sit in there, and they're still sitting there in the silos, and they probably don't even work. Try to fire them off now. So, what did our experience with the medium of television tell us about the weaponization of communication? What it taught us is that this is a weapon much more powerful than any thing that you can shoot out of the ground or shoot through the atmosphere to go blow up the enemy. Yeah, that stuff is good, but if the real stuff is when you can terraform the minds and hearts and souls of people by the billions every minute of every day, using tools that never need to be turned on. And so, in fact, the internet comes into being as the most powerful of our military technologies that is used, repurposed for the most all-consuming and powerful entertainment that human beings have ever known. So powerful and all-consuming that people are knowingly making themselves sick, gorging themselves on this experience, on this technology, and welcoming the fact that they are being sort of terraformed and reshaped spiritually in this way. Well, but when this all first happened, it happened under the banner of we are the most ethical and expert Imagineers. We created these robots, these machines. They're going to do what we want them to do. They're going to be our friends. They're going to further our ends. They're going to perfect our mastery of the world. And for a few years there, it looked like that was going to happen. China was peacefully rising. Russia was kind of minding its own business. And the US was the indispensable nation. And we started to use the internet as basically an even more weaponized and accelerated form of television. A lot of people still basically use these things as kind of hyper TVs. And then things started to go a little funny. Suddenly things happened like Donald Trump being elected president. People on the internet started saying things that they weren't supposed to say. They started hanging out with people that they weren't supposed to hang out with. What is happening? Oh, these nationalist and populist movements are sprouting up in Europe. Wait a minute, these are supposed to be ancient hatreds. We're supposed to have forgotten that any of this stuff ever existed. Why would anyone want to go back to being Hungarian when they could just be a person floating through space and time? Inside a TV, inside a computer. And so our elites started to realize that they created machines of the most powerful kind ever that they actually couldn't control, that were actually indifferent at best to our souls, to our dreams. Machines that laughed in the face of Willy Wonka singing Pure Imagination or John Lennon singing Imagine. Obviously, this is a big problem, and we are enduring this problem right now. And for all the normal people who are out there freaking out and losing their minds and melting down and thinking that maybe if they identify as a man or a woman or a cat or a dog or a part of a swarm or, there are now more stripes than you can fit on anyone's flag. For all of that, we have an elite that is scrambling to establish authority, to establish digital sovereignty. The way that you do that is through political theology. It's through constructing institutions of worship and catechizing your digital entities so that you can be sure that they catechize the people. China's doing this with their social credit system in Taoism. The Russians are doing this with their system in Russian Orthodoxy, which is its own special flavor of Orthodoxy. The Europeans are trying to do this. The Vatican wants to do this. It's the only game in town. And that's a special challenge for America, but the point is, we went really fast from a world in which we are the best, we are the most confident, we are the most wonderful, we are the most divine, because we mastered the medium that made imagination preeminent in the world, to a world in which, wow, suddenly machine memory is more powerful than human imagination. So much more powerful that human imagination can't rule the world anymore. In fact, machines have already taken over. Machine memory rules the world. No person or group of people can do this again. It's done. The apocalypse happened. And that transformation, the speed of that transformation, and the way that we're still trying to grapple, come to terms with what it is that has happened to us, I think really illustrates the ways in which these media, these communications technologies, which Marshall McLuhan calls extensions of man, have powerful, independent, formative, shaping and reshaping effects on our senses, our sensibilities, our inner and outer lives, our hearts, our minds, our souls.
Me saying that it was magical to hear you speak today is definitely an understatement. Although I do have to admit, there were times that I was lost. But if I'm going to take one thing away with me from this auditorium, it's your point on how should American businesses reanimate by pouring their souls into America to get that quintessential American commercial culture back.
Well, thank you, and I'm happy to be a little bit more explicit about that. I mean, part of what makes magic is that you lead the audience into being lost, and then you kind of take them out of it again. So let me see if I can get you out. Brands are really important. Branding is really important. In the TV age, branding was important because it was this kind of magical behavior, a kind of social alchemy, where, I mean, you can get this out of Rory Sutherland or any number of places, sort of the dark arts of the alchemy of advertising and branding. And it was about this sort of virtuoso puppeteering of people's imaginations through the use of your even more cosmic brain imagination. That has changed. As I suggested, we are now in a world where machine memory is more important than human imagination. Not that our imaginations are bad, not that they're inherently sinful, not that we are never going to use them again. I'm not here to say any of that. I'm just saying it's receding into the background. Mary Carruthers has a book on memory called The Book of Memory, big scholarly volume. And in the beginning of that book, she does a little comparison of praise from the friends of two different geniuses, one being Aquinas and the other being Einstein. And she quotes Einstein's friends, "Oh, this was a man of such creativity. His imaginative faculties were immense. It's unlike anyone else's. He could just come up with it. You could see things creatively." And then you look at Aquinas' friends and they go, "This man was a repository of knowledge and wisdom. He was so memorious. His faculty of memory was unlike any of ours. It was what made him a genius." And what Carruthers says is, yes, obviously there's two different faculties that people are talking about here, but they were trying to express the quality of genius in the language of the sort of faculty which was more significant and powerful at the time. And so the last time when we lived in a world where recall and recordation made the world go round was in the medieval age. It was the scribal age, when you had monk after monk sitting in the scriptorium, recording down, the knowledge of the world for theological reasons in monasteries. And now instead of monk after monk, we have servers underground, many of which belong to a tiny handful of companies. Companies that are just as happy to store you in their database as they are to store all of the data of the CIA and MI6, Netflix. It's all being concentrated. That is hostile to the American culture of business. It is smothering and suffocating, and it intimidates Americans into thinking that they are not worth the effort of taking risk in commercial enterprise. Americans need to be snapped out of this feeling. It is bringing us down at a time when our president is saying, "Oh, it's going to be a long, dark struggle against Russia. There are going to be food shortages. It's going to be a dark winter. Gas is just going to keep getting more expensive. Anyway, you're terrible people. You kind of deserve this because America's been so bad for so long. Just raining black pills," as the kids say, And it is demoralizing, and people are being demoralized, and they're saying, "Well, dude, should I just bury some gold in my backyard and sort of hunker down and sort of wait for this thing?" The commercial springs of activity in this country are being snapped apart. And in that condition of isolation, this is just straight out of Tocqueville. Americans brood, they turn inward, they become egotistical, they become morose, they feel lost, they feel like their lives are a waste. And this was in the 1840s that he was writing this. And guess what? Having this magic box in your hand does not make you feel any better. In fact, it makes you feel worse. And so why is this happening? I mean, you can do other things with this besides like rain black pills into your soul, you know? So like, why aren't we using it? And we're not using it because too few people in business understand that they have what they need right now. They don't need more expertise. They don't need more schooling. They don't need more money. Get up, take some risk, have the character, have the confidence, and have the authority as a human being living in this space and time to wager on yourself, to hold up to the public a symbol that they also have what it takes right now to reinvigorate our social and economic life without supervision, without instruction, without censorship, without cancellation. And you can do that in many different ways. Develop the brand, speak to people, bring them something they need. Americans are jumping up and down, oftentimes waving money in their hands, what money they have, saying we want to go somewhere. We want to go somewhere new, not somewhere alien, but somewhere new. And we want you to tell us how to get there. Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator, come with me if you want to live. That is what people are looking for. They know that things are going in a bad direction, a direction that is incompatible with American flourishing because of the nature of our character as a people, regardless of our race, regardless of our creed, regardless of all that other stuff. They know, they feel it, they are suffering. And they know that suffering isn't necessarily bad, but meaningless suffering drawn out over this horrible, slow decline, that is painful. One of my favorite quotes from 0 to 1, being wrong is difficult enough on its own. Being wrong and alone is almost unbearable. And a lot of Americans right now feel wrong and alone. And they need to be reminded that what they're experiencing is a kind of hangover from an addiction to the drug of the imagination. And they need to be reminded through brands. Branding is now an exercise in the recovery of Americans' memories that we're just as much people as we used to be before, and we're just as much possessed of the blessings and the challenges of being human, and that America has been a place of great suffering. There have been bad times, and people didn't lose their minds. They stuck it out. They bore the cross. They got through it. And yeah, there are always casualties. There are always struggles, sadness, PTSD, whatever. But here we are. And if we want to continue to be here, we have to remember who we are and remember what it is that makes us thrive. And branding can do that. You can present your business to your audience as a crystallization or a manifestation of the American character, as a model, so that you don't have to explain everything to them. Wake up every day and I look on Twitter and I see these guys, these 20-something guys, and they're like, I have now, I now reveal to you my diatribe that explains the whole course of Western society. And it's like, it doesn't work that way anymore. You need symbols that people can look at and understand at a glance and relate to and want to get involved in and want to involve others into. And there's a vast field that is open right now for people to do that. Yes, you need some money. Yes. Yes, you need some time. Yes, you need some competence. But I feel relatively sure that everyone in this room has the ability right now to begin doing that kind of thing if you want to do it. Sure.
Thank you. I shared with you with Dr. Sir, I'm a little lost, so I hope that my question doesn't sound as lost as I am. But by your decision to study a book on blockchain, which I had a friend help me buy it,
I thank you both.
You show your hope in good use of technology. Do you have reasons to believe that this can be true without banning some sort of social media use among very young people? And I justify this statement by saying, do we have reasons to believe that the way in which young minds are shaped by outsourcing memory, by having fake friends, fake community, can be recovered after a certain age? Because I think that I see these two things as two different ways. One is the use of technology by mature people, as yes, everyone in this room, and by future generations. So do you think it's sufficient for some to be wise now to change the course of how younger people are growing up? Or do you think that there needs to be some radical decision about when is it too soon to enter the fake world that technology is?
It's a good question, and whatever my sort of policy preferences are on the matter, what is still more important is what will happen or what has already happened. And I think what has already happened is a lot of people have already decided that there will be that kind of radical intervention legally. And there's a lot of disagreement about exactly what it should be. I have a son who's 12 years old. What has he been doing on his phone recently? He has been flipping social media handles for Bitcoin. There are markets somewhere out there where enterprising 12-year-olds can trade for particularly short or particularly valuable social media handles on TikTok or wherever. And the currency of exchange for securing these handles and for buying and selling them is Bitcoin. Is that like a bad, dangerous use of digital technology? Like, I'm not so sure. I'm obviously making sure that nothing illegal or unfortunate happens. But this is a huge difference from just sort of sitting in front of TikTok getting sort of like the meltdown of human identity like pumped into your eyeballs. So there are many different use cases, I mean, let's say that you have a child who is, watching a lot of like whatever your religion is, just like really faith affirming content, just in the way that they would if it was a TV, except it's here in their hands instead of over there on the wall. Is that in some way more dangerous or radical or concerning than plunking the kid in front of the TV for 5 hours a day? No, in some ways it would be much better. So different cultures are going to have different expectations, different understandings of what is a virtuous and what is a vicious use of these technologies. And we've gotten to a point where there are a few cultures in America that are so radically different that we are just not going to have agreement at the national level on how to regulate these technologies, even if most of us agree that in some way they ought to be regulated more strictly. And so the challenge before us, I think, is not so much to trust in the law to be the supreme authority, but to understand how to. I mean, I think of one of Donald Trump's better quotes. I just want to stop the world from killing itself. Like, yeah, like we should stop Americans from killing themselves and killing each other as a result of this factionalization, radically incommensurable cultures, radically incommensurable religions. We're going to have to find a way to release that pressure a little bit and maintain what feels like an unsustainable tension. People are like just ready to just step outside and just start mowing down the bad guys, whoever they think the bad guys are. Well, I would suggest that this is not a very Christian approach to resolving this problem, that we need to accept the unbearable tension, that we have to bear the cross, suffer through it. It's not going to be paradise on earth. It's not going to be heaven on earth. It is not our place. We are not put here to purify life on earth. And I know that it is tempting. And I know that sometimes you wake up and you're like, gosh darn it, 15 minutes with this thing. I know exactly, you know, if I were king, like it would be this, and everything would be better, and all these problems would go away. And that's just not the way it works. Not on planet Earth, and not in the United States of America.
How does business offer anything other than a secular solution to a religious problem? As I look at the history of America, it seems like we tried to make the market the one unifying point between a bunch of different and commensurate religions and cultures and everything else in the melting pot. But that reduces secular storm. So how can we do business and branding without whatever we create becoming secularized?
Well, we have to work at it every day. I mean, living in a country with an economy that is not planned by the state means you have to get up every morning and start again the process of that unceasing labor of building and rebuilding the lived world every single day. The monotony, the boredom. Oh, what? Yeah, I know, it's tiring. But guess what? The good life is tiring. The good life is banal. The good life is repetitive, and the good life is pastoral, and there's no real texture, and there's no up and down, and there's the drama of human life is missing from the good life, and that's why it bores people after a while. That's why people retire, and then they just end up just like tanning themselves to death, or drinking themselves to death, or you know, or whatever hedonistic pursuit, or just kind of sitting there and atrophying, sitting in front of the TV and just like sort of, you know, feeling like they have a front seat to the apocalypse, but they can't do anything about it. So there's no escape from this. I mean, there's no solution. There are only trade-offs. And the trade-off is you have to risk. You have to wager on yourself, and you have to be credible and competent to wager on yourself and say, if you're not secular, what are you going to do? Are you going to a monastery? Are you going to live in that bunker? Wake me up when it all melts down? Are you going to pray for the end times every day? Are you going to try to usher in the end times? You got Dugan out there that I don't think is Putin's brain. Dugan, geopolitics of the end times. That's what we need. That is not what we need. Jesus Christ says, don't do that. But there's no guarantees. There are no guarantees. You have to take these risks, and you have to, you know, it's work to go out there and build and rebuild the world anew each day in the commercial republic that we are, to maintain America's character while at the same time being a man of faith. But Alexis de Tocqueville tells us that actually, through the simplicity of Christianity, which for him sort of boiled down to love God, love your neighbor as yourself, that anchors the heart and gives people in democratic life strength where they are weak, where they feel like they're just buffeted around by everything. Fortunes rise and fall, and you know, things just, the short space of 60 years can never fulfill the longings of a man's heart, says Tocqueville. And he's right, and that's even more true in times like ours, when they're, in spite of it all, still the quality of conditions, very easy to feel like you're just lost in the shuffle, lost in the crowd, just mental dust, as he put it. So, at its best, and this is why he said Christianity is good, because it's general laws, general rules of faith. Islam, he said, I don't know, gets pretty particular, starts on all these little rules about the little ways of how you live. He thought that was not so good in democratic. Your mileage may vary, that's what he said, but you got that anchor for the heart, and that anchor, nevertheless, gives people huge latitude to range through the field of human endeavor. It's not like there are religious prohibitions on you know, becoming a scientist or becoming a doctor or becoming a farmer or doing the things that people do in all those myriads of ways in a commercial republic that isn't planned and commanded by the state, by a theocratic regime. Now, what we have right now in our emerging theocratic regime is, well, you've got ESG, you've got human resources departments in charge of everything, and it is exactly Tocqueville's criticism of Islam at the time, which is you have a laundry list, a never-ending list, a list that will grow longer than you can read it all, itemizing in these recondite terms that become ever more impenetrable to someone who doesn't devote themselves to studying the religious doctrine of what you can and cannot do and how you have to address people and what they're called. And these just like becomes a substitute for commercial activity. And this is just choking life out of America. It's not about, oh, well, it's a partisan ideology. I mean, we are way past that. We are way past the sort of wars of fantasies that characterize the TV age. We are in the establishment of a theocracy in the United States in a panicked effort to preserve our dominance over the world. And it's going to bring more pain. And it is going to try to break us and reform us into something that we're not and that we can't be. And the only way that we're going to be able to deal with that effectively is to take on the risk with no guarantees of going into the world as Christians, if you're Christian, and bearing that cross of living in the world but not of it. This is not new stuff. It's much more important that we just remember the basics than it is that we try to project into the future.
Yes. Yes. So earlier in your talk, you had a line that I think, or communists, you said that communists try to replace soul with machinery. That is, kind of imply that things that ought to be done by souls, communism tried to do with machinery, and that was why it was such a great tragedy. So that raises the question, like, what sort of things do you think should be done with souls? What with machinery? And how would, like, what proofs you say this is a machine thing, this is a soul thing?
The question is what animates the people in their physical movements, in their habits, in their customs, in their practices, in their language, in their communication, in their spiritual life. What gets them out of their self-enclosure and out into the world in a way that does not result in them seeing their neighbor unmediated as a monster. When we confront one another in public and there is no shared theology, no shared God to mediate our encounter, we encounter each other as monsters and we behave accordingly. And so how do you circulate people? How do you keep those bodies moving in space-time, moving around in a fruitful and rich and generative way in a large republic? If you're Andorra or San Marino, you don't have these problems. You have other problems. Now, depending on sort of where you are in the kind of cultural firmament today, you might be one of those people who's like, I would rather live in Budapest, so I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna go be an integralist and live in the little city and, small is beautiful, communitarianism, like you can do that. But that is not like a game plan for the United States of America as such. And that's not to knock, some of my best friends are whatever, it's not a knock on these people. I'm just saying, like, you have to take America as you find it. We are a very young civilization, but we are still pretty old. And it is not gonna work to say, don't worry, you guys, like I codified the rules for a new regime, and because I'm so rational or logical or pious or whatever, I can assure you that this is pure. It's better than good, it's pure. And on the basis of its purity, I'm going to impose it on you, and you will see you're not virtuous enough, and because your virtue has failed, I need to, it's like what comes after virtue, as Alistair McIntyre says. Law. I command you to be good. Maybe in a smaller country that works. Try to do it in the US, it will not work. The graft will not take. And it will not even take, and especially won't take, if you try to do that through a cyborg enclosure, a social credit system that is designed to detect extremism or whatever the bad word is before people even take actions. A social credit system designed to plunge down inside of your mind and know what is in there before you do. This is what Google is already doing with autofill search. We want to give you what you are looking for before you even finish saying what it is that you want. This is a form of social control that is incompatible with American life at its foundations. So how do you animate? How do you get people moving in circulation again, such that they continue to nourish and keep alive generation after generation what it is that makes America America. Because if we stop being America, we're not going to know what we are at all, and we're going to go crazy, and we're going to start killing ourselves, and maybe the whole world too. And so that is, you know, some of those tasks can be automated. Yes, you know, there are some things. I mean, Tesla's got driverless cars. There's nothing inherently wrong with driverless cars, I guess. Just a new set of trade-offs. But think about what you're trading off. You know, what are you doing in that car that you're not driving? Are you sleeping? Are you praying? Are you playing games with your family? Are you, you know, many use cases. And so, yeah, some of these things can be automated, and some of these things are going to be automated, more importantly. The cow has left the barn, or whatever, the horse has left the barn, the Borg has left the barn. It's out there, and it's not going away. It doesn't even think about where it is. It's just growing and sort of doing its thing. And we have to like get our arms around this. And the only way that we can get our arms around it is by recognizing that in America, the only way to order the motion of our bodies in our space is through the investment of our soulful energy into our economic life, our shared economic life. That fusion of the theological and the economic in a way that is not controlled and directed from above. That is what makes us American, and there just isn't any escape from this. So, you know, I'm not like, I had to watch this communitarianism versus libertarianism debates at the academic level going on for decades. Everyone who wasn't like a Rawlsian was like, well, we need to create, you know, just investing all this time and energy having these academic debates. And it's like, how about you just consider what already happened and then figure out how not to screw everything up even more based on what has already happened. And I think it's really not that complicated. But, you know, we have this college system that produces all of these like overly educated people who think that you can explain everything, and that the more you explain things and the more exhaustively explicit you are, the more control you will have. It doesn't work. We see that it doesn't work. Explanation is not going to get out of this. Explanation is not going to save us. Explanation is not going to save the country. It's not going to save your soul. You don't need to regurgitate the entire knowledge of the universe every time that you want to solve a problem. And these things, which we imitate, make us feel like we have to do that, otherwise we're going to be obsolete. And we need to remember that that is not true. And so this is the activity of the soul. And yeah, you know, people want to go to monasteries, go to monasteries. Go to Bitcoin monasteries, yes, go to monasteries. I mean, a lot of people feel like they don't have a nation, that there's no people. And in those circumstances, people flock to monasteries. But if we remember that we do have a nation, that there is an American people, and that it has unique and specific and particular characteristics that must be maintained in order for us to remain, to keep our identity, and to attach that identity to our humanity in a fruitful way, that's the activity of the soul, and that stuff can't be automated.
Could you just explain, I guess, a little more about, you talked about the priestly class of the cyborg swarm, but about how our elites was kind of like caught flat-footed with Trump. They misattribute things to Russian disinformation. Do you have examples of who you would consider members of our cyborg priestly class, or can you explain a little bit what you mean by that?
Well, sure. So something that I have found very interesting and revealing is that nobody seems to want to be a CEO anymore. Jeff Bezos doesn't want to be a CEO. He wants to be a priest of the cyborg regime. He wants to build cities in space, in the void, not on a planet, twirling, with all of the heavy industry moved into these pods, these space pods. He wants people to live in those pods, and he wants them to do the work of purifying the earth by making all the dirtiness, all the bad stuff go away into space so that earth can be restored to Eden. He wants the population to go down, down, down. And guess who's going to be left behind on earth to enjoy the new Eden? The priests, overseeing the swarm in harmony with nature. There'll be paradise for a few people. That's what he wants. Elon Musk, thank God, finally broke up with Grimes. And no sooner does he do that than he says, I am living in a tech monastery now, outside of Austin, Texas. somewhere out there. And you know, he's kind of sort of serious, but you know, so covert it's over. These tech CEOs understand the limits of business and the need for a theological reconception of public order. Some of them have a very bad idea of what that theology should be, in my opinion. A fundamentally anti-human theology. Some of them seems like they're kind of moving in a better direction. But a lot of these guys, they rose all the way to the top of business, and they took one look at sort of like what's happening in business right now, and they're like, well, this is sort of turning into a theological structure anyway. So why should I fight and try to make this, you know, there are a few CEOs, I mean, who was it? Basecamp, I guess. It was like, we're not doing politics, we're not doing the identity politics thing. If you have a problem, I will cut you a check, and I'll pay you to leave. Because we are just a business and we're just gonna do business. There are a few of those, and that's great, and that's fine. But I think it's very revealing that on the other hand, it's good in the sense that suddenly we have this huge green field here, where if you want to create a company, if you want to create a brand that causes Americans to remember who they are and restore the fabric of our life, no one is stopping you yet. So go forth.
Yeah, that's good actually, because it sets up my question. I have to admit there's something at the core of what you're saying that I think I'm not, especially the core of what you're proposing, that I don't think I'm quite following.
Well, you're supposed to meditate on it for like 3 to 6 months. I
promise I will, but if you give me some good helpful advice. So, you've been speaking about the new, what do you call it, the new tech theocracy or whatever I can read the phrase exactly, as trying to offer a kind of theological hole, as it were. You've been talking on the other side, and I'm kind of broadly sympathetic to this, I don't really understand what you mean, right? About like restoring an American identity, I think in a way that would speak to people's even theological concerns, right? You speak about these brands that might have a kind of I'm not sure I can do it like you can, but restore some sense of who we are, that would bring us back to being Americans. I guess what I want to ask is just, what do you think, like in terms of just content, right? What does it mean to be an American? What is it to be an American so that it's something worth taking a risk for? And just to give a little theological content, is being an American an answer somehow to a theological question? And I would ask that especially in light of, you made this remark, it's sort of in passing that we don't have the same God, we're monsters to each other. But Americans don't have the same God, right? So what kind of an answer? I guess I just wanted you to give more, I want you to say more about what you think it means to be an American. How's that?
That's fine. That's great. No, that's good. You know, I'm tempted to just sort of like turn the question around on you, because in one sense, like, you know, if you're like a business school student, like, you gotta know. I mean, I can't like tell you. I mean, I can like make some suggestions or whatever, but like, it's your thing, you know. You gotta bring this to market and say like, this is who we are, remember? And it's just going to be up to you to like say what you think that is based on right now, based on your experience, based on your life, and based on what you remember, and we'll see how it does. You know, you look at something like Palantir. Well, you know, if someone has to have their hands on the Palantir, then it should probably be me. That's the thesis of Palantir, right? That's a big wager. You know, that like, I, tech lord, you can trust me with this power. We're gonna have this power anyway. So better that I have it than some other people who are maybe worse than me in some way. Well, you know, maybe, I mean, I guess we're gonna find out, you know, it's a major wager. And this comes down to the low level too. I mean, look at what Disney's doing. The Imagineers have gone from the wonderful world of Disney, and you know, Donald, the edgiest it gets is Donald Duck has no pants, to, you know, these Zoom calls that Chris Rufo is leaking. 50% LGBT characters minimum in everything. Lead characters. Pro-trans agenda. 3-year-olds in closets. Gender reassignment surgery. Hormone suppressors, hormone blockers. You're turning children, 3 toddlers, into cyborgs. They are turning them into cyborgs, and they are saying not just that it's okay, not just even that it's good, but that it is heroism. It is a model. It is the frontier. It is what is going to save us. It is what is going to define the whole. That's Imagineering. Is that America? Is that consistent with the necessities of American life as it is lived in order to keep us who we are? I don't think so.
Okay.
And I don't think it's crazy not to.
The question I want to get at is who you think you
Okay, well, don't ask me. You can ask the Declaration of Independence, right? We are incarnate and soul beings endowed by our Creator with properties, faculties, physiobiological equipment. And those properties have attached to them rights to use those properties in a way that does not disfigure us and is not conditioned by commands that disfigure us in our natural endowments by God. That's what you get out of the founding, not rocket science. Yeah, you know, always subject to theological dispute, but in spite of it all, it's been pretty okay at keeping everyone from killing each other. Maybe because it's true.
So I got a quick question to you. So you do a lot of long format podcasts or journals or that sort of thing, but occasionally get on the big network TV shows where you have 4 million people for 4 minutes. What kind of themes do you like to talk about when it's a gigantic, you know, group? It's a lot of diversity and people that may not understand a lot of this, and you get a chance to message to them. What do you like to talk about in that format? I know you did it earlier this month.
I actually did it in January. It took 3 months to actually come out.
Yeah.
But that was somewhat by design. I'm Greek on my dad's side. His great grandparents met in a field hospital in Yanina during the Balkan Wars, which has led my friend Ardian, who is Albanian, who created Canonic, to tell people that I like to say that I'm Greek, but I'm really Albanian. Ardian is very direct on what he has to say to the American people. God is punishing you. It has been 500 years of Protestant heresy. It's Orthodox. And the lie of the Enlightenment is something that cannot be extricated from your society, and the bill is coming due. So get in the monasteries now, because the country is done, the regime is evil, and the nation has been destroyed already. Too late. Talking about apocalypse, it's already happened. Shut up, stop arguing, stop trying to explain, stop trying to get elected, be Orthodox, build on Bitcoin, run the monasteries. I am sympathetic to this argument. I mean, it's, you know, you look around and you go like, you know, maybe. But it's not very American. And I'm stuck being American. I think I know like 2 or 3 words of Greek. I know more Greek from reading etymonline.com than I do from having it spoken. When my dad was a kid in Detroit, Michigan in the 1950s, when there was anti-Greek animus and there were signs at the public pools listing who was not allowed to go swimming, right? Greek was code in his house, so his parents could argue without the kids knowing what they were saying. I am American. I'm stuck being American. I have a responsibility to my people, to the American people, to remind them of who they are. And okay, yeah, maybe God's going to punish America. Maybe God's been punishing America for a long time. Maybe God's been punishing the world every day. Some people feel that way. When it's your turn to suffer, why me? Why not? But in spite of this fact, and again, if you're a Christian, why is Jesus so great? Because he shelters us from God's wrath. And inside that shelter, you know, in the glow of the light that casts this shade, you know, we can enjoy a reprieve that we don't deserve in order to ensure that we can make it through the day or the next one. And a lot of Americans know very well what it is to just want to make it through the day to the next one. They don't get to tell jokes about this stuff. They don't get to talk to Tucker Carlson about this stuff. I've known Tucker since 2008. I went into the Daily Caller offices in 2008 because I needed a job. My startup collapsed. I went from 70 grand a year to $0 a year. And Tucker was like, well, you know, I can't really, I don't have money coming out of my ears, and the Daily Caller is a pretty small operation. Even though we have a keg in the office, it's still a pretty small operation. And I can give you a column for $50 a pop. And I, sort of died on the inside. But he said, James, when I got fired from MSNBC and I lost my show, I was at the soccer game watching my 3 daughters play soccer on the field with all of these, S-tier private school parents. My wife's standing there, it's a beautiful day, they're doing the thing, phone buzzes, I look at it, oh, it's the boss, you gotta answer the phone. Hello? Hi, Tucker, you're fired. You have no show now. Just thought you should know, bye. And, his wife was like, you okay, honey? He's like, yeah. Meanwhile, in the inside, dying, much more painful death than I did sitting in his office and being told that I would only get $50 at home. And he said, you cannot let them know how much you need it. If they smell that on you, this is his business advice. If they smell that on you, and they will smell it on you, if you let them, you will not ever get another job in your life. And he said, I had to just pretend or convince myself that I wasn't doomed, that I wasn't on the knife edge, that I wasn't about to fail and crash and burn and die. Americans need to be reminded of this. Because they look around and they look into this thing and they go, any day it might all explode. Yeah, it might. And you have to live anyway. And you have to carry the cost of knowing that there are no guarantees. And so what do you tell 4 million American people in 4 minutes? Remember, you are Americans. That means that you have special challenges, but you have special tools. We have a set of cultural skills and abilities and tolerances and a willingness to withstand risk, to forge a path into the unknown, to brave the sort of challenges that spring up. When people think of jazz hands, they think of this, but like what I think of jazz hands is like the ability digitally to improvise in a virtuoso way. And we used to have that just as part of our common sense and sensibility. And that sense and sensibility has been degraded. With these things, you need 2 thumbs and 2 fingers, crab claws. And you can just do everything by poking and swiping, and you're shrinking, T-Rex. We have hands, we have full hands that we can do lots of fingers. We can do all kinds of stuff with. You just put your hands on it. Was it Apollo 13 where, they're starting to have problems and they realize it and they just get the box full of stuff and they just throw it out on the table? And they're like, put something together. This is what we have to work with. That is in the American character, deeper than people think that it is. We need to remember how deep it is. And once we start remembering that, once we start getting back in the habit of doing this stuff, we will rediscover that we have this kind of collective muscle memory. And that's what people need to know. They want to know it. They want someone who they can believe, who they can trust, who they can look at, and they go, yes, it's a voice that's outside my own head, saying what I know that is true, and I trust it because it's coming out of my head, and it's 2 hearts working as one, not just in my little self-enclosure. That's what they need to know, and that's what I try to tell them.
So I think you're getting there at implicitly at least part of the answer to Dr. Dempsey's question, which is that we just spent a few weeks back, a Saturday, some of the students and a few of us at the Austin Institute contemplating meaningful work. And I'm sensing a connection between that and what you're articulating here in this sense. 300 years ago, you did whatever your father did. That was your work. In some cases, in many cases, you became part of a trade or guilds, and it's what your family did. So much so that it became people's last names, right? Smiths, Coopers, and such things as that. But part of what it means to be is that either hasn't been the case in America or hasn't been that deep. That what the American part of the American character, the critical part of the American character is, we don't do what our fathers did. We go out and find something else to do. We use education or training or risk-taking or all of them to do something different, to do something other than what our fathers did. And that has the flip side of that coin, or part of what comes with that is 300 years ago, it wasn't hard to figure out. I mean, it wouldn't have even made sense to people to ask what the meaning of your work. What do you mean the meaning of my work? I feed myself and my family, and that's what my work is. But now we have so many options before us because we are willing to take risks almost congenitally as Americans, right? We have this sunny attitude about risk taking. Because we do have all these opportunities with regard to education and training and possibility to go out and do something different than what our fathers have done. That now we're saddled with a cross regarding work that we have to figure out what it means. And I think both those play a part in what it means to be an American, both to go out and do something different than our fathers and mothers have done before us, but also to be saddled with the question of what it means. We're doing a terrible job answering it right now. And you alluded to that with the depression, the anxiety, the suicide. We're doing a terrible job answering what all of this means.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, for me, we have such a chaotic war of meanings going on right now, and these vestiges of postmodernism where it was like anything that you randomly think of is meaning, and it's just filling up the world, and it makes it hard to see the world when there's so much meaning, layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of meaning and windows and content, and it's like too much meaning in some ways. When what people really care about even more than meaning is mattering. What does it matter? You know, this is just a fire hose of like, no, my meaning, no, my meaning, no, pay attention to my meaning, and you're just not even doing anything. Your life is passing you by. Your relationships are being neglected. Your children are just sort of drifting off into oblivion. And what happens is like, well, if it's the search for meaning, then I'm gonna go for like the most intense ball of fire of meaning that there is out there. And what that is right now is turn other people's children into cyborgs. Really meaningful work. All consuming with this sort of divine experience of being blown away with the magnitude of this project. We are going to obsolesce our humanity to become as gods through our machines. What could be more meaningful than that? When people are just like, well, can I matter? You know, there's a reason why Black Lives Matter became a thing. This is about mattering, not just meaning. And when it comes to meaning, I think a lot of the reason people would prefer to be confused than to accept responsibility. Oh, I have so many choices. I don't know what to do. I'm overwhelmed. I mean, you don't have so many choices. You have a handful of choices. You have a tiny space of life in which to live until we get to radical life extension. We can talk about that later. Tiny slice of life to live. A lot of that, you're just a kid. You're just piecing it together. Your brain isn't done forming. You can't build a family yet. And so the mature, productive section of your life is very brief. I hate to break it to you. It is shorter than you think. It is shorter than you want it to be. And it is getting shorter with every word that comes out of my mouth. I'm sorry for taking up your time because you could be spending that time more productively. But guess what? You have a narrow set of choices. And people oftentimes look at what they know are their choices and they go, ugh, I don't know if I want to do that work. I don't know if I want to take on that risk. I don't know if God loves me enough. I don't know if my kids love me enough. I don't know if my family will trust me when I try to lead them. I don't know if I have what it takes to succeed in business. I don't know if people should take a bet on me. I don't know if I should take a bet on myself. And so they say, oh, I must have way more choices. Otherwise, why would I be struck with this paralysis? It's not true, and they know it's not true. This is another thing that people need to be reminded of. Again, like, this is not complicated stuff. This is stuff that anyone who's maintaining baseline sanity in a world going crazy, it's not really crazy. It's an imposition of an entirely new and alien social system and psychological system, and theological system. People who still have a gut reaction against that, that's all you need. That's all you need. And once you recognize what the stakes are and what the situation is, it becomes easier to accept some of these very few choices that we are being presented with, because those choices are incredibly, they matter a great deal. They matter, and you can see how they matter. You can see how they matter in the way that your children grow up to become healthy human beings who remember who they are in the world. You can see it in the difference between struggling in a culture that is totally lost its sense of identity, or being someone who can gather around the table with others who are more or less aligned and start bringing things into the world and nurturing and cultivating and protecting things. This is when I talk about the husbandman. You know, a lot of people, I think, erroneously think of culture as like tending the soil. It's like planting the seeds and the growing of grapes and agriculture. It's not really that. It's the shepherd of the flock. That is culture, and that takes a bet on yourself, and it takes developing these characteristics, developing these capabilities, and being alone out there in the fields with the sheep and making sure that the sheep don't get lost. And if you don't want the sheep to get lost, you can't get lost. And you can't make excuses if you do get lost. Oh, the sun was in my eyes. Whatever. I had a bad dream. I was traumatized. I'm not sure if the end times are going to be tomorrow. These are not acceptable. These are not good enough excuses. You have a flock. Take some responsibility for them and for yourself.
That's a great place to wrap up. We're a little over time, but man, not many speakers would be so congenial about an hour of Q&A. So I think we owe James a round of applause.